Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. Today I'd like to go over my rogue build for module 23. The main content will be these dragon hunts, and my build will make sure that you can maximize the amount of damage you can deal against dragons, along with having the flexibility to run literally any content, from even the new reworked Rise of Tiamat all the way down to just simply your random queues and solo questing. Keep in mind, I will undoubtedly make adjustments throughout module 23 of this build, so keep an eye out on the title, and there'll be a link in the video description to any update videos I make on this build. Specifically, if the Band of Air gets nerfed, a few things in this build will probably change a bit. Those of you more endgame players who'd like to see my stats, you can see with all my gear procced off and in combat, they look like this. 90% power, combat advantage and crit severity, with critical strike at about 85%. But you can consider crit capped with hastily sharpened blades. You can of course switch that out to back alley tactics when you're not using the ring against dragons. This crit one I would use instead. Now we're going to go through this step by step. They'll be time stamped in the play bar below along with the video description. Initially we start with powers, and this is my primary setup for boss fights. You'll generally be using Duelist Flurry backed up with a Gloaming cut every now and again for that extra stealth regen. For our encounter powers, Wicked Reminder is about the most important one there, increasing the damage the target will take as well as reducing their critical avoidance when you use it from stealth. Then our hardest hitting one is Assassinate, and you want to have good positioning for this. Make sure you're behind the target to obtain this extra 25% damage. Keep in mind you can use it from stealth and thus gain that 25% damage if you're, let's say, doing solo content or the one with the aggro of the boss, and thus can't be behind them. Otherwise, Path of Blades is there for some nice AoE utility along with just maximizing your damage, and it's generally used in conjunction with the Band of Air as that still works. A side note on the Band of Air, it has been stated that it will be fixed in the future, and I will make an update to this build. There'll be links in the video description to any updates that I make, and that will then correspond to what happens with the Band of Air. As of now, it's still working the way it is, and we're just going to make our build around that. Otherwise, Path of Blades just allows you to proc off your other abilities more often, and it's very important for one companion in particular, the Wild Hunt Rider. So despite not having a Band of Air, I would still use Path of Blades. It can also help a lot with boss fights where you have some adds. As for our AoE encounter powers, well, I would switch out Wicked Reminder for Smoke Bomb and my Assassinate for Blade Fury. You're using Blade's Fury from stealth to get that double cast, and you're using Smoke Bomb in the middle of enemies to daze them, and then Path of Blades just have that active all the time. As for our daily powers, Shocking Execution is your go-to for boss fights, and Whirlwind of Blades for mob fights with lots of enemies. You again want to cast your Whirlwind of Blades from stealth just to make sure you have combat advantage damage, and Shocking Execution you want to cast after you come out of stealth to obtain this extra 10% damage from Cunning Ambusher. You can see with our mechanics we have our dodge roll, you'll gain immunity frames, and thus you'll be able to avoid taking damage completely in certain fights. Just your quick utility to get out of those red zones. Stealth, again, most importantly, allows you to gain combat advantage damage. You can see I have no combat advantage against this dummy, and when I enter stealth, I now have combat advantage due to this purple ring. And combat advantage allows you to obtain 90% more damage, or at least dependent on the percentage of this stat. Then for our class features, I'm usually just running Skillful Infiltrator and Oppressive Darkness all the time. The utility of extra movement speed here along with crit strike is just great, and Oppressive Darkness, extra hit every time you deal combat advantage is really good, especially to proc the Band of Air. Then for our feat setup, this is where I really hate this part of the game where you're going to have to retrain in order to switch out these feats. Alternatively, you can have different loadouts to have different feat compositions, but normally you'll just go with everything here except you want to switch Skullcracker to Duelist Expertise whenever you're in AoE fights, and you want to switch hastily sharpened blades to your back alley tactics when you're not against dragon hunts. Currently within dragon hunts, with having all the buffs against dragons, particularly with this ring, I don't have my critical strike capped, and so I use hastily sharpened blades to get that average 5% at the very least. So let's move on to the next section and we go to our rotation of our powers. Now for AoE, it's very straightforward. You're just spamming everything and killing everything. I will like to mention when you're going in AoE, Gloaming Cut can be very useful. Just when you kill an enemy with Gloaming Cut, or when your enemy dies after you've hit them with Gloaming Cut, you could just assist, I believe, and you'll gain a big boost to your stealth meter, allowing you to cast Blade Fury again from stealth. So usually in AoE, if you're not getting hit a lot, don't cast Blade Fury a second time, wait for your stealth meter, and then you can cast it from stealth again. And that just gives you a ton of damage. Of course, if the enemies just die so quick, it can be worth it to just use Blade Fury twice. But for single target damage, because we have the Band of Air, we are usually just holding down left click, which is our Duelist Flurry, and just attacking as much as you can. If you don't have the Band of Air or it gets nerfed, well, you'll want to rotate between Gloaming Cut and Duelist Flurry. You want to have a look at the boss bar and make sure that the boss has these bleed stacks. There's this green icon there. You can get them up to 10. And when you have 10 stacks, then you'll switch to Gloaming Cut and just use that until those bleed stacks are gone, and then it's back to Duelist and so on, just rotating between both those at wills, and you can get the timing right and maximize your damage. Then you have our encounter powers. You want to just cast that Path of Blades all the time, unless you have particular mechanics where you don't want to destroy something, Tower of the Mad Mage, the ice, and then you want to go into stealth and use Wicked Reminder and then assassinate, making sure you're behind the enemy. Then just Path of Blades when it's up and holding left click on that Duelist Flurry. You want to use your stealth again here and then use a Gloaming Cut to gain the stealth regen and just keep using Duelist Flurry. Your stealth meter will be active using Wicked Reminder from stealth and assassinate and Path of Blades again. And that's my standard rotation. Now when in a coordinated party, you want to be using like a debuff artifact or a party-wide buff artifact, and your team will start by calling artifacts. You use the artifact, Path of Blades, Wicked Reminder from stealth, assassinate, shocking execution, and then your mount power and back to Duelist Flurry. You want to make sure, of course, you have the bleed stacks for the artifact call, again using stealth when your encounters are on cooldown. You should get that regen back up, and then you should be able to use Wicked from stealth and assassinate, and again just rinse and repeat. Just make sure after you've cast your artifact to maybe wait 5 seconds before you do your burst, because people might need a bit of time to actually have all their artifacts cast along with their mount powers, the buff ones. And if you're using back alley tactics, you want to go stealth, Wicked Reminder, then your daily power, and then assassinate and your mount power, just to get that extra 10% damage bonus on that assassinate. From there, it's simply just learning the mechanics of whatever content you're running and getting your timing right. And that's my rotation for my character for maximizing my damage. Again, AoE fights, it's just spam everything, and that's about it. It's all about getting there first to kill everything, and it can also just be about timing, waiting on your encounter powers to use them at optimal times when there's lots of ads. So let's move on to our statistics and what do we want to focus on. As a rogue, we want to focus on power, combat advantage, crit, and crit severity, leaving accuracy to last, and I pretty much don't focus it at all in this build. The ratings you can see is all the way down at 65k, and I could sacrifice power to increase my accuracy, but the only way I would do that is if I would switch out, let's say, my Dragon's Bane for a power raptor and then gain that bonus there of power and shifting it to accuracy bonus. Again, I will make a video later to go over that and see if that's worth it. Otherwise, you also want to make sure you're having plenty of extra damage bonuses, and since with Module 23 we'll be fighting dragons a lot, I have the setup right now to give me damage bonus against dragons, and we do have a setup to switch that out. So let's move on to our gear, and we're running with this Mythic headpiece here with the critical strike. Alternative is your Goristro horns just here from Avernus Hunts. Then you have the tactful leathers. The alternative is the Bone Devil's Ribcage from Avernus Hunts, and these petrified wristlets, and they are from the auction house. They're from master crafters, and instead of these you could just run with some damage bonus ones or something that gives you power and then shift stats around to get more crit severity. I feel right now these are pretty much the most optimal gloves as they give you the most stats and a very reliable bonus, only dependent on your health, and if you're running with a healer that's usually not a problem. You're generally either about to heal up when you're below 50% or you're dead. Just keep in mind the price of them will go down drastically after the series of guild events times 2 guild marks and then double professions, wherein you'll be able to get a lot more of those materials needed for the gear. And much more people will be more prepared for this coming around, as times 2 guild marks will allow them to get a lot more marks to buy those maps. Then for our weapons, you can see I'm running with the masterwork weapons, and I generally run everything with these unless I'm feeling particularly selfish. Then I'll switch to like my Lionheart, just making sure you have the same modifications on them. Modifications would of course be Duelist Flurry on the main hand, and the offhand I have recharge speed and I have enhanced combat advantage. You could of course run with mirage weapons instead if you have those. Those are pretty good, especially in single target boss fights, which phase a lot. And we move on to my boots, and I'm running the Forest Guardian ones from the Vault of Stars, and they just give me the most amount of ratings, the most amount of stats then if I can make use of them. And other boots are out there for sure, like the Wasteland Wanderers, things that would give you power rating, etc, etc. Now for our neck and waist and artifact set, I'm running with the Mythilar, and that just simply easily comes from completing the campaign Dragonbone Veil here at the end. So it's a very easy set to obtain, and even if the Band of Air gets nerfed, the Mythilar set will still be very good. So for our rings, of course we have a Band of Air from Hardcore Vault of Stars. Many of you might not have this, and thus it might be just easier to run with a Red Eyes Glare, or you would want to run with a ring that would give you extra damage, like the Queen's Golden Opal ring giving you melee damage, or you could run with one of the newer rings within Module 23, which would be either your encounter powers get 5% more damage, or what I feel would probably be the best is Brute's Fury from the Mighty Breaker's Ring of Clarity, giving you 3% more damage when you're 25 feet or closer to your target. Be very good as a rogue. But again, it's only 3%, and compared to the Band of Air, that's nothing. Second ring here is the 10% damage ring against dragons, and you can switch that to the Soothsayer's Ring of Absolution when you're not running against dragons, and this gives us our crit strike, and this allows us to switch Hastily Sharpened Blades over to Back Alley Tactics, and would essentially then give you a bunch of Forte there instead of Critical Strike, and you would want to switch like your Guild Boon over to Crit Strike instead of Power. And that's how I would switch it around to still obtain your stats. Otherwise, for our shirt, we have this one from Dragonbone Veil, the mini bosses. You can also buy it off the auction house, giving us 5% combat advantage. And then the trousers, you're running with the new ones, which are going to be from Dragon Hunts. You can obtain that 2400 Critical Strike as pants with a bunch of item level, and they're really good also to give action point regeneration. So now we'll move on to our enchantment section, and you can see I'm not switching anything from my previous builds, so you won't have to upgrade any new enchantments, and I don't want to either. So 2 J's, 2 Garnets, and that's it. The rest you can throw in defense, whichever ones you have, and utility you want a Garnet as well. You want recharge speed bonus here. You could have movement speed as well. That can be very useful, especially in AoE fights. And then a poison thorn. You can of course have a curse burn there as well for AoE fights if you really want to go try hard on maximizing that damage. Overloads, you can just go with a Rage of Flames and a Devil's Precision. The most important one is the Devil's Precision to give you the stats. If you're running particularly against dragons all the time, you can run with the Dragon Slayer one. That's just with guild marks from your stronghold. That can be cheaper than the Rage of Flames, since you don't have to grind events, and these Rage of Flames ones are pretty limited, these purple ones. Artifacts, you can see I'm running the 3 Storyteller Journals. If you don't have them, don't worry, just switch to things that have much higher item level. There will be a wide variety of new artifacts, 5 of them, 6 of them upcoming with Module 23. You can see all these 5 new dragon ones, and then you'll get one from the Master Tiamat, which you'll be able to buy on the auction house as well. Higher item level will give you more damage in unscaled content. Otherwise, the books just have that little bit of an edge that are better, but very little. I've made a video going over it, and in unscaled content they're only like 0.2% better. Now on my gear here, with regards to modifications, you can see with my headpiece I'm running power, my armor piece power, my arms power, and my feet also power. So just buy 4 power kits there. For my neck, waist and rings, I'm running combat advantage, all combat advantage. That just gives you the most offensive stats there. Make sure not to forget about those modifications, as they give a ton of stats. Now we go to my race and my ability scores. You can see I'm running the Wood Elf race. You can run other races like the Gith, the Half Orc, things that just give extra bonus to these offensive stats that you need. Check back in the stats section. There's also the Dragonborns that will suit as well. But for my build, I need crit strike, and so the Wood Elf fits best. Ability scores, we're going with strength for the extra physical damage boost. It's multiplicative damage, so it's very good. And then the charisma for the forte and recharge speed. Just giving stats and recharge speed will help us cast these encounter powers more often that especially have lengthy cooldowns. Now we move on to my companion setup, and you may have seen it already. It's this here. And I'm running with an active companion, which gives me the ability to use pretty much any summoned companion without having any negative effect on my build, which frees me up with a lot of options. There's so many active companions out there, it just can be more expensive. It can be easier to just run with an augment as a newer player, and augments I would suggest is going to be the Owlbear Cub here, as it gives you those 3 offensive stats. You will then have to change a bit of your gear pieces. You might want to use like the Wasteland Wanderers instead of these Forest Guardian ones, and you might want to use something else instead of the Petrified Wristlets, because you will get a lot of ratings from an augment. Otherwise, there's the new Icosahedron Ion Stone from the part 2 of Chromatic Scales. You can get it for free just here in the legendary pack. And then there's also the Festive Tiger. Those would be the 3 main augments I would run with if you didn't want to go down the route of having an active companion. But active companions, again, just give you a lot of flexibility. You can run ones that help buff the team. Black Death Scorpion and Tiamat will be really good, and so will a Spine Devil, or even the Succubus or the Incubus. And then there's a Stalwart Lion as well for the extra survivability boost, and it has some wacky business with the Band of Air right now still. If I'm feeling a little selfish and just want to maximize my own damage, well, I go with the Paranoid Delusion for boss fights and the Succubus for AoE fights. Alternatives to single target companions would be the Armored Orc Wolf for burst damage, and the Githyanki for burst damage, and the Pseudo Dragon for continual sustained damage. You can check all my other videos where I go over active companions and which ones you should be using. Otherwise, companion gear, we're running this Tarnished Emerald stuff, and this mainly comes from Crown of Eldagon, but you can get 1 piece from the Scaleblight Summit just here. You'll get another piece from the Chromatic Scales campaign just here, and then you can get your 3rd one by completing the Scaleblight Summit on a 2nd character and obtaining this pack and switching it over to your main character. And you'll be able to obtain 3 of these pieces. Otherwise, feel free to run lower item level stuff that you may get from Sharandar or even Master Expeditions. And then of course, we're running a Mythic Companion enhancement there to give our companion the most damage bonus. You can see the bunch of stuff here and this enhancement. We're running Potency for the extra power. We're running with the Minsk here for the extra damage bonus. It's okay in AoE, but it's even better in boss fights and against challenging enemies. The Wild Hunt Rider, very good bonus on a rogue because we have our Path of Blades. And when you cast Path of Blades, you can see for every hit, it has a chance to proc the Wild Hunt Rider. And there's also something funny with it that it pretty much procs instantly on the first encounter power you cast when going into combat. So we have absolutely no problem proccing this off and refreshing the bonus so it doesn't expire at all as long as Path of Blades are up. And the reason I'm running with this is because we have that ability to proc it, and it gives 11.25% stats. Most everything else only gives a maximum of like 7.5%. However, we are running with more things that give us that extra damage bonus. The Batiri is up there 11% as well, and the Dragon's Bane also 11%. If you're going for your AoE build, switch the Batiri out to your Black Dragon Ion Stone and switch your Dragon's Bane over to your Neverwinter Knight. Some of you might not have that, so you might want to take some different stats then instead. You could go take it a step further by switching Minsk out to something that would give you like accuracy, but most of the time you'll have adds which can be pretty tanky and you may as well do extra damage against those. And then you want to switch your headpiece out to something like the Emerald's Enclave hat or some other headpieces which you gain extra damage, let's say 5% damage in Undermountain or 5% damage in Sharandar instead, just so you're not going way overcapped in crit strike. And finally, in our utility, we're running the Golden Cat. Now, if you did want to run a Raptor that would give you power, the Tamed Velociraptor, you could switch out the Neverwinter Knight for that, for boss fights, but you would have to rejig things around. Switch potency to accuracy, switch your mount insignias, which we haven't gone over yet, to skill and aggression. You would need to switch 5 of those, switch out your boon here to crit instead, and switch some crit and power enchantments over to accuracy as well, and you'd be able to fit the Raptor, but I will go over that in another video. So we'll move on to mounts, and here in our current tab I'm running with this Golden Touch for single target, and otherwise I generally switch to the Pegasus for AoE. There are many alternatives to your Golden Touch like Tunnel Vision and the Giant Toe Tongue Lash and many other AoE combat powers as well, but those are the ones I would suggest. And then we're running with the Neverwinter's Pride here. It gives us crit severity and forte. You can use whatever ones you have available to you, but otherwise if I'm running party content I will generally run ferocity, and generally the party buffs will make up for the loss in stats. Shift some buffs around to get more crit severity, just using some guild food, just using your invocation, and ferocity, you mainly just use it for the Band of Air. If you don't have Band of Air, don't bother with ferocity, just go with the stats and that'll help you out. For the stable, we're running with these here. You can see we have a Protector's Camaraderie, and that's because we have an active companion. We may as well make most of it, giving us up to 1000 crit severity and 1000 defense. That's 1% of each. So with these insignias here, Gladiator's Guile, just for the movement speed, and 3 Assassin's Covenants, and that's just for the offensive stats. We do lose defensive stats, but we increase our offensive stats. The main colors to just be aware of is the Sturdy Crescent color for the encounter power damage, and then the Wayfaring color for the crit severity. The rest don't matter much, you could just not even bother with them at all, and don't worry too much about upgrading them to Mythic. I just have them here on Mythic because I can. Otherwise, just have them on Purple and slowly upgrade them to Legendary by doing the Reaper's Challenge, and that's all fine and dandy. Now we go to our boons, and we can see just here, we're running with all the offensive stats here. We try and take all these bonuses against different enemy types, as if you just run like random queues, you'll generally run into those different enemies. And then like for endgame content, let's say Tiamat, you might want to have this Fiends one, as there's plenty of those ads there which are Fiends. You especially want to take this movement speed, the Marathon Runner, just helps a lot. And then you can go like with defensive stats from there, focusing defense and awareness. And tier 5, I generally go with Forte, and I go with recharge speed. Master Boon, Bloodlust. None of the rest are good. Guild boons, we have just these here. You generally want to go with your Revive Sickness if you're running hard content where you know you might die a bit. It reduces that effect of the Revive Sickness, and that definitely helps a lot. Overall, what buffs am I using? Well, on our belt item here, we can see we have the Forger's Box. I've made videos in the past on that, and you can look it up on my channel how to obtain this and upgrade it. Just gives reliably 3% power. Just keep in mind, if you die, you lose the effect of this and we'll have to cast it again. We are running, of course, with a Wondrous Dragon. Gives us 6% extra damage and damage resistance against dragons, and that's just fits in with my dragon build. You can of course switch these things out, again switching over to the Sooth's Ring of Absolution when not against dragons, and you can switch out this Wondrous Dragon to something like the Hawk or a Doohickey, and that will just give you that extra utility to gain a bit of damage by casting those effects every 30 seconds. And then for the food, we're running with a Flask of Potency, we're running with Squash Soup, we're running with Wildstorm Elixir, We're running with Sambocade, least important one. All it does is give movement speed, but it's a nice buff and it comes from Stronghold guild marks. We're running with an Invocation Blessing, and then of course if you're against dragons, you could run with a Dragon Slayer Overload instead of like Rage of Flames. The damage bonus on it is like very unnoticeable, and it can be more reliable to just go with Rage of Flames. But if you've Band of Air, the Dragon Slayers do help a bit. And then you have like the Ancient Dragon Potions here and the Scrolls of Protection. They just give you extra damage bonuses and survivability against dragons. You do have other things like your Diamond's Blessing. There are other things like Scrolls, and there's also Legacy Food and so on. But I like to just run with food that I can still obtain in the game very easily just by running events. You can see the Flask of Potency you'll get from just by doing crafting. You can get it in alchemy, or you can cheaply buy it off the auction house. You can get Squash Soup from the Summer Festival, and you can get the Wildstorm Elixir just from invoking here. You can see it's just there. Of course, buy it on the auction house as well. And just Invocation Blessings come from invoking all the time as well. I have gone and run the new Tiamat trial with the Succubus, as you can see to the top left, and she works pretty well. I want to test it out with the Paranoid Delusion. Won't be as good within this AoE fight in here, but can help out more with single target damage. And if nobody's running a Black Death Scorpion, I have the option to run that there with my build, or even things like the Spine Devil or the Lion, and it can just help out a lot more to be able to buff the entire party with the companion you're using than just running with an augment, especially when I can get those ratings pretty high without an augment. You saw the stats I'm getting. All I'm doing is sacrificing a bunch of accuracy, but it allows me to focus on those 4 stats and then just damage bonuses. And in terms of the damage output of this build, well, it can be very competitive. You can see I'm running Master Tiamat here. We managed to complete it, and yeah, I didn't do so bad for myself. Sure, I only ended up second on the leaderboard, but I'm very close behind, and I'll blame that on running a Succubus, which is an AoE companion. It provides a vulnerability buff to everybody and really doesn't deal a lot of damage in single target, which can be a majority of Rise of Tiamat. It's only the very initial phases with the clerics that AoE actually matters. So again, I'd like to give a massive thank you to all of my channel members for helping me keep my channel going. And if I present this well, consider leaving the video a like. And if you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.